everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the ColdCast. I'm your host, Dr. Anna Johnson. And if you think about it, gosh, we've been at this for almost 7 or 8 episodes now. So hopefully, you've really been able to see a little bit of our strategy and how we think about supply chain, transportation, procurement, all of those things. And then also maybe get an understanding of how you can take that back to your company and use it. So in the cold chain industry, I'm very happy to be able to talk to our senior manager of procurement, Brian Murphy. So in the cold chain industry, procurement and its strategy are so important and essential to ensuring the continuation and the sustainability of the supply chain in general. It's one of the key success components for what we've been doing for 125 years. And so I think it's important to show everyone kind of, hey, what was our sustainability journey? What you can take away from it, and then what kind of things to think about in the future so we can progress the supply chain. So I'd like to introduce Brian Murphy.
Hi, Anna.
Hello. Hi. How's it going?
Not bad.
Good. Well, let's get started. So why don't you tell me, I know you're in procurement right now, but give me a little bit about your background.
So when I first graduated school from Rowan University, I was an accounting major, and I was looking for a job, an entry-level job in accounting, and I ended up working in the mortgage industry prior to the 2008 mortgage crisis. I don't know if you remember the mortgage-backed securities tanking. Yeah. So I found myself without a job in 2008, and considering a career change, decided to give it one more go and worked with a recruiter, and they talked about this nice kind of They described it as it's like a family type of organization. Mm-hmm. It's a mid-sized organization, and a lot of people have been there a long time. So I said, oh, this seems interesting, and started to learn about public warehousing, which in my mind, going into it, I just thought that food was produced and then they just sent it to the supermarket. I didn't realize there was this huge funnel of activity that happened in between that. So, that was coming right into here, and from there, worked in the corporate accounting department. Mm-hmm. Took a journey up to Pennsylvania to start up their accounting office, was asked to come back to run the corporate accounting office, and most recently took a job to start a brand new corporate procurement department. So in a nutshell, it's 2 minutes and 15 years of my career.
Well, I think it's interesting, and, you didn't mention this, but you do have an MBA in supply chain. So what I think is really interesting, and again, when we thought about procurement, thought about how we're going to consolidate procurement, we'll get to in a minute. I think it's interesting that, you came from an accounting background, so the numbers, but then you supplemented with the supply chain background, because you got to understand the whole supply chain, right? So tell me a little bit about our procurement journey. Like, why did they want to start a procurement department? Why do they want to start any department, right?
So, I think I could give a little nod to my old boss, Charles Azut. He was
our old CFO.
He was our CFO, and he wanted to accomplish something while he was here as a CFO, and that was putting our company on a PO system. Mm-hmm. So if you can imagine, we did have some procedures around our CapEx purchases, but most of our day-to-day purchases, all the approvals on the purchase are done after the fact. Okay. So his, vision was to create an environment where we had more controls over our purchasing. Yeah. And with that came a project where he needed somebody to run kind of a revamping of our entire purchasing system. And that's kind of how I got involved with procurement initially.
Okay. Yes. And so, how long ago did we start procurement?
The department officially, in a full-time basis, it started in the beginning of 2021.
Okay. So we've been at it a few years now, right? So, and we're going to talk a little bit about sustainability. I think we had a previous episode with Sarah Cook where we talked about sustainability. So when you think about procurement, you think about this PO system, trying to centralize all of our procurement and, leverage it to get the best possible mix of suppliers and vendors. How do you think about sustainability relative to procurement?
So sustainability, in my mind, we have a lot of the same goals. Mm-hmm. Now, the goals have different outcomes, but some of the activities that need to happen, we kind of there's a lot of synergies between our two departments. So for me in procurement, the nature of how US Cold has progressed over the years is a lot of stuff. It just started out as a completely decentralized model. Like all the purchasing was really done at the local level. And, as we've grown as an organization, we've really not been able to take advantage of economies of scale to our best abilities because of the decentralized nature of our purchasing. So one of the things that is one of my goals in procurement is to consolidate our vendor base and have fewer, deeper relationships with trusted partners versus trying to have every site have their own relationships for the same types of things.
And what do you mean by trusted partner?
So, if you think about what the engineering group has done before I got into procurement, they were doing a lot in the major engineering category where they were doing a lot of managing of the procurement. And I've been successful working with Mike Lynch and Dan Postlethwaite, being able to kind of embed myself in that process and sort of take some of the administrative burden off of their hands, because they were sort of doing it because there was no one to do it.
Right.
So in that, working with our forklift vendors, our battery vendors, and making sure that I'm keeping those relationships strong. And really, in my mind, with those relationships with forklifts and batteries, I feel like the what is a lot more important than the how much. Like a lot of procurement exercises, it's, get it for as cheap as possible.
Right.
That's software for us. I mean, getting software cheaply,
right.
Making sure that the business owners have what they need. But for something like forklifts, they're so critical to our operation. We want to make sure that the communication lines are strong between us, the vendor, and the warehouse.
Yeah. So, and I mean, from our perspective, that infrastructure, we really saw it during the past pandemic, right? There's not a lot of supply out there for anything, for building materials, for construction, for batteries, forklifts, all those things. So when you talk about building a relationship, you're really trying to build that relationship so that we have good communication, right? Because it's not always going to go the way we want it to go, but we want to be able to talk to those folks and know what we're doing, right?
Yeah, it's great comment. I mean, to speak about our vendors in the forklift arena and the battery arena, some of the lead times on forklifts, it still hasn't, back in 2020, COVID, drove a lot of this with a few different things, getting supply from overseas. Right. A lot of these parts are made in China, and we know what the issues have been with getting those. Yep. The labor markets, having people that could work in these factories that are producing this. Yep. And, everybody knows that caused a lot of inflation as well, which had pressure on the price. But at the end of the day, we needed to get our forklifts to replace aged assets. So having people that were easy to work with and kind of dynamic in the way they approached it, we were able to find ways to make sure the site still had what they needed during this difficult period of time. And it felt like we had true partners in that. Like we were working together to solve this problem. There wasn't a lot of actually infighting in this situation at all. Right. So I inherited some of these relationships, and I was lucky to have such good partners in these areas. So
now, I guess that's the supplier relationship piece. How do you mitigate that lack of supply? What steps are you taking to mitigate that?
Well, part of it is trying to get an understanding of what the drivers of that are and setting expectations. Okay. I mean, there's certain supply chain issues like the forklifts, the lead times are at over 2 years. So what can you do about that? Right. Well, you talk to the sites and you find out, can we maintain our list for another year as we wait for this new supply to come in? Luckily, we found out, yes, we can. Now, it was a bigger problem with batteries because a forklift, you can pay to maintain it longer and it'll still run. Now, is it running the best it can? No, but it'll still run and it's still going to keep the operation flowing. Yeah. But a battery starts to degrade over time. So when you're not getting your battery supply, your lifts are only taking a charge for half the shift and then they're having to change them. So it's really having a real operational impact. So we had to put a little more pressure on the battery folks to sort the situation out. So for the batteries, it was only really a 1-year issue. And we found ways to kind of free up production slots. And, we knew roughly how many batteries we ordered on a yearly basis. So we were able to get those amount of batteries guaranteed so that when we ordered them the next year, they were all able to get delivered in time. Okay. And so, I mean, from your perspective, do you think that if we didn't have procurement or we didn't have something like overseeing it, it would have been a larger issue? Yeah, because what it does is our involvement from the corporate level. I have a direct relationship with, say, the battery vendor. East Penn Manufacturing is our preferred vendor for batteries. We pretty much sole source from that vendor. And what happens when you don't have this centralized relationship is there's many conversations going on between the vendor and the sites because we're regionally driven. We have 4 different regions and chief engineers and regional engineers are all reaching out to this vendor about a lot of the same things. So what we have the ability to do is streamline the communications and make sure we're all working in the same direction. Right. And it's not confusing. It's not, somebody doesn't step over and kind of overcommit trying to get their batteries. No, it's still a work in progress. Yeah. I mean, so it's not exactly as if, hey, we're getting involved and everyone's like, well, great. We have to build trust with the sites that, all right, well, Brian is committed to taking over this relationship. Do we trust that he's actually going to take care of us? And that's what I've been trying to build over the past couple of years with a lot of the regional engineers in our organization so that, when they know they can call me and they know that I'm going to try to help them sort out their problem. And also in a way that's not going to get them in trouble on audit too. Right. That's a good point. That's a really good point. And so
back to the whole preferred vendor strategy. So you set up these folks, or you kind of identify someone who's a preferred vendor, and then do we guarantee them business? Do we, like, what's the benefit to them versus the benefit to us?
So from a vendor perspective, when we're able to create these relationships, they know that they're going to get guaranteed revenue coming their way. So they know that the extra effort that they're going to have to put into this relationship is actually going to pay dividends from a standpoint of keeping their company profitable.
Right.
Because, when you think about it, when you have a real true partnership, it's not just about, hey, I want this cheaper. It's, hey, let's make sure we're both making money here. Let's make sure we have what we need and make sure the problems out there are known and we have a plan to fix them.
Well, and, if you think about it as, the general manager of a facility, when you have a preferred vendor, that means you don't have to go through and get approval. You're gonna get consistent service. Somebody else is looking out for you. So I feel like that's a benefit.
So that's a benefit on our end. So if you're a chief engineer, you're asked to wear a lot of hats as a company. One of those hats is having to go out and one of those hats is having to go out and procure bids for any sort of purchase they have. Well, when you have a preferred vendor, you're not required to get multiple bids. And we have processes we go through to make sure that those are sound and we're getting value out of that on a 3-year cycle. So they can go out and buy a battery without having to go and do all this extra work. And they know the battery that they're getting is going to be a reliable Deca battery, which has been tested and proven over time.
Right. So I think that's a great benefit to them. And we talked a little bit about sustainability and how sustainability fits into this. Can you go, we never really touched on supplier or preferred vendor supplier selection and what kind of sustainability things you're looking at what you think about when you're going and doing those kind of preferred vendors.
Well, it's from a preferred vendor perspective, we're not in a bad place.
Right.
I keep honing in on our battery vendor, but they do a pretty good job at a lot of this stuff. So we actually brought Sarah in our last business review and asked them about their sustainability efforts, and we're unaware that they had a 30-something page sustainability report.
Oh, wow.
We were able to read through that, and they offered us a tour of the facility, and we went up, and Sarah Cook came with us, and we saw how battery lead was smelted and saw how the recycling works, and learned that basically 25% plus of all the new batteries they make is from recycled lead that they use.
So it kind of makes you pause and think about what are they doing to better their business. We think about sustainability and kind of this whole, the ethical and social consideration, and it's good to know that they're thinking about it too. But we're not making decisions based on that.
Yeah, I think earlier I said there's a lot of synergies, right? Yeah. So from my perspective, I'm not exactly here to think about sustainability, but we all are now.
Right.
We're being all asked to kind of, Sarah's leading the charge, but we're all part of this. And for me, it's creating these visibility into these vendors. And, when it comes to the scope 1, scope 2, and the emissions reporting, the way that we're structured right now makes it very difficult to get reliable data out of our system. So my goals in procurement of consolidating our vendor base for potential economies of scale also work in line with her goals of getting visibility into
and
what
data, right? So that we can measure this.
So the data we're getting from vendors is all kind of on the invoices on the header level. So what we were able to do is, if we can consolidate the vendor base, we'll have more money with that vendor, and we could ask them for more. So we could say, hey, we have these sustainability initiatives. Not only do we want to buy pallets from you, we want to know how much wood we're using.
Right.
Now, in a disparate, decentralized business model where you're buying these pallets from 46 different pallet yards, good luck trying to get all that information. Exactly. So it's trying to consolidate the vendor base is going to really kind of drive us getting better pricing on things, but it's also going to drive our sustainability
and and the ability to collect and report on data, because at the end of it all, that's what we want to understand is how much we are consuming, so we can put together smart targets so that we're able to kind of show improvements and be able to measure.
I can't remember who said it, but you can't improve what you can't measure. Exactly. And at the point, we're trying to figure out how do we measure this stuff so that we can come up with better goals for sustainability. Yeah,
and I think that goes back to building those relationships. So when we think about those relationships that you fostered over time, what strategies do you use, or how do you think about building those relationships? How do you go about doing that?
Relationships with the vendors or relationships internally?
Yeah.
Because
good point. That's a good point. That is a very good point. Yes.
So you'd be surprised. Not everyone exactly wants head office getting involved and coming in and saying. So a lot of this has to be grassroots and kind of work slowly. I think one of the things that vendors that are going to be our partners have to realize is that our sites have a lot of autonomy.
Yes.
And I have to go and convince the sites that this is a good idea. And they have to be willing to know that that's going to take some time. So sometimes you have vendors that come in and be like, well, no, we can do this all. Just send out an email and tell them we're doing this. And I'm like, hold on, stop the train. That's not US Cold.
Right.
That's not going to work.
Yeah.
We have a lot of stakeholders out in the field that have opinions on how we should do things, and we need to listen to make sure that these things are actually practical and scalable.
Right. Yep. And that they are going to drive something that's going to drive us to be better, really. Right.
Well, exactly. And that all goes into the building the trust.
Yeah.
You know, if I take the time to assess the situation and talk to the stakeholders, they're going to make these decisions on their own because they're good choices at that point.
Right. And I think about, we talk about freezer gear and, us customizing freezer gear, and I was involved in it from a marketing perspective, and everyone used a disparate amount of freezer gear from wherever. So, I think, I just think marketing and procurement kind of similar, that you have to build credibility. So you have to give them a great product at a great price that won't tear up, and you have to take their feedback and incorporate that into it. So you've earned their trust, so they want to wear that freezer gear, right?
Yeah, I mean, the freezer gear project was great in that aspect because it allowed me to be a little creative. Like, in all honesty, most of my procurement exercises are very paperwork driven, contract driven. It was real fun to kind of talk to people about where they wanted to see improvements in their gear. And, some of the features that, you, me, Dominica, and the team rolled out, I'm really proud of what we came up with. And, we were going to be starting our wear trials soon, so I'm excited to see what kind of feedback comes back from the sites. But I think that taking a holistic approach to it and making sure that we were doing it in a measured fashion, getting the feedback from the sites.
Being collaborative.
Yeah, we conducted focus groups. We had people from the operations on our project.
Yes.
So I think it's important to you don't know what you don't know. So unless you're talking to people, you can't really get the ideas that you didn't think of.
Right. And, because we have, 42 locations across 13 states, everybody is a little bit different. So being able to, kind of consolidate and aggregate that data and say, hey, listen, we're going to do this. We don't like it. We're flexible. We can change it. I think that's really good because we heard a lot of good feedback from folks, and just being able to incorporate that and take it to the vendor and say, hey, here's what we heard. How can you fix this? Because I think they wanted to fix it. They wanted to progress and advance their business. And, we were helping them do that.
Yeah. I come into the situation with the gear, and I was a bit out of my element, to be honest. It wasn't something, talking about. Luckily, I had people to help me figure out the fashion choices, because anyone who's seen me around the office knows I'm not exactly a fashionista. But I had the support I needed from the marketing department to do what I needed to do for procurement. For me, it was a bit of a project management exercise, making sure I got all the good opinions. So marketing had ideas about the branding and then the consistent branding, and the operations had a lot of feature ideas.
Right.
And, Lisa from safety wanted to make sure we were ANSI 3 compliant.
Right.
So having the gear be highly visible and having it be stylish are two competing forces, and we wanted to make sure that was balanced in the effort.
Right, because ultimately, again, you're trying to build credibility, and you want people to purchase the items that you've selected. So I think that was important, just a good collaboration.
Finding the balance, I think, is the important part. Just making
really
sure you have the right people in on the conversation kind of gives you a better chance of being successful.
I think that the whole freezer gear was a great example of collaboration, among our warehouses, our partners, and our vendors. So are there other examples of ways that we've collaborated and that's been a benefit to not only the facilities, but also to procurement?
Yeah. Actually, one of the projects I'm really excited about is within the Northeast region. It's the stretch wrap project. So what we're doing there is we're consolidating our vendor base and trying to buy from a single supplier.
Okay.
Not only that, we're kind of reviewing the SKUs, and we went from 4 different SKUs in the 4 sites that were involved, and now we're all using the same roll of film.
Oh, that's good.
So that kind of allows us to buy the film at truckload pricing.
Right.
And then on top of that, it becomes more of an exercise in working with a trusted partner. We're buying the film from the same person who does the maintenance on our machines.
Okay.
So one of the things that I've learned about wrap is that a lot of people treat it like a commodity. It's just film. But there's a lot of physics and science behind the way you wrap a pallet. A higher quality wrap can stretch further. So you get a stronger wrap with less film. So from a sustainability angle,
you're not using as much. You're not producing as much waste, right?
Exactly. So we found ways to wrap pallets cheaper, and we're using less plastic to do so. So it's a win on the P&L, but it's also a win
on sustainability, which it kind of all ties back together. And I think that's really interesting. I think that's super helpful because you just think, okay, well, I want to be as efficient and as cost effective as possible, but you also don't realize that in the end, you're actually going to be more sustainable as well.
Most good sustainability ideas actually save you money.
Right.
So and the other thing was is that as I was collaborating with the sites, the site had a great idea to, well, let's not do a milk run and deliver the wrap to each site that ordered on the truck. Let's drop it at Bethlehem and use existing shuttles in our network to move it around to the different sites. So not only are we getting the wrap cheaper and using it more efficiently, we're also using less trucks to deliver the film. Now, a lot of these sites were doing a pallet at a time. So the amount of deliveries they would have a year, region-wide, was about 80 deliveries. And we're cutting that down to several a year. And then where we're shipping them around to the different sites, we're utilizing our transportation program where the trucks are already going there.
Right. And so that is a great example. I think the other one is, working with some of these vendors, if we have a good relationship with them, they're willing to, maybe hold the inventory on their own, so we don't have to spend money consuming that product before it actually gets we need it, right? So we're not doing all these milk runs. We can,
So it's very rarely you get into any project and IT doesn't get involved in some way. So, with the stretch wrap, you think, well, what does IT have to do with that? Well, keeping track of where people's inventories were at each facility so that we order the truckload at the right time. It's kind of the process I'm working through now. So we've been working with our IT group to come up with some forms leveraged out of Microsoft Office 365, where we're going to be able to have business owners go in and log their wrap on a weekly basis so we can start to study the patterns and get on a real lockdown how often we need to order it.
Interesting, because you could be ordering it too frequently. You could be ordering it too infrequently. And I mean, really.
Well, that's working through something new. We ordered too infrequently, and we had to do a bit of a fire drill to get people their wrap. But obviously, anything new has these kind of hiccups.
Right.
So working with the sites, coming up with a game plan. Okay, we didn't like that this happened. What do we do to kind of take care of these issues? And I think that we're going to come out on the other end with a process that's actually, foolproof.
Yeah. Let's talk about some other things, not just kind of the blocking and tackling. When you think about, procurement, and you have a great printout of an iceberg here. It's like, it's not just sourcing and negotiating. It's like all these other things, right? And you have to make sure that, as large a scale, as much money we're spending with these vendors, we have to make sure that they're doing things the way that US Cold would do them, right? So there's some ethical considerations and procurement that you don't really think about. So do you have, how do you think about ethics and procurement and purchasing? And, what could you tell other folks maybe to think about or consider when they're kind of working with their procurement department?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think some of that starts with data-driven elements, right? So right now, one of the projects that we're doing in our department is administrative, and it's to digitize our vendor onboarding process, right? So historically, we haven't collected enough data on the vendors we're working with during this onboarding process. So I've been working with, a lot of different business owners like Sarah and Dan. And, finding out that they'd like some of our vendors to sign our code of conduct, saying that, they're actually going to follow the same sort of ethics that we follow. Right?
Well, a lot of our customers ask us to do the same, and we certainly have no problem doing that. So it's interesting that, we would turn around and ask our suppliers.
So it can be embedded into this onboarding process where you can imagine when you sign up for your, your new iPhone, you got to go through that list and check the box. Now, it's more than checking the box. They're agreeing that they accept our values, basically. So on top of that, starting to collect demographic information, right? So one thing we don't have great visibility into, that's one of our sustainability initiatives, is trying to get information on what vendors we use that are female-owned or minority-owned. And, like I said, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So what are our goals for minority-owned business? Well, I'm sure we're buying from minority-owned business, but I couldn't tell you how much. So we're trying to set up the onboarding process so we can collect that data at the time when we bring vendors on. Then there'll be a process to kind of close the gap for vendors we already use.
That's a great idea. So are there other strategic projects that you're working on now in procurement? What does 2023, 2024 look like?
Well, I think the continuation of consolidating our vendor base and starting to work more towards an area where we can get more of our spend on the PO system, get more pre-approvals, kind of locks down that controls of the system. Another project I'm working on is creating a bit of a dashboard for people out in the field to use for visibility into what vendors are available for different types of products. That's a great idea, yes. So as it stands right now, our vendor base we have over 7,200 active vendors.
So when somebody wants to buy, a roll of paper or a printer cartridge, if they want to use a preferred vendor, they have to pick up the phone and call you and ask who that is, right? And so
the one thing about preferred vendors is that our list of preferred vendors isn't that extensive. We probably have a little over a dozen, less than 2 dozen.
Oh, okay.
In the IT world, we set up a lot of them because
Yeah.
we took over IT procurement. That was one of our first
Right.
things we tackled. And we inherited a lot of them from the engineering group. So most
Okay.
of our preferred vendors you're going to find are for CapEx within engineering or IT related
Okay.
equipment. With that being said, people don't have a lot of visibility into what vendors are already in our network. So
I agree.
it creates a situation where, well, if you don't know who to add, you just go on Google and say,
Yeah.
well, where can I buy this,
Yes.
right? You may be unaware that we already buy from 28 people
Yeah.
that offer that same product.
Exactly.
So what we're trying to do is, I've already been through stage one, which is creating a categorization of vendors, uploading it into our ERP. And now I have to work with our BI team to kind of create a dashboard for visibility that a chief engineer can go in and say, hey, I want to buy pallets. Who sells pallets that's already in our network? And it gives them a good starting point where they don't automatically have to go out and find a new provider.
Right. Does it also take into consideration, like pricing? So is pricing part of it? Like, hey, if you use this vendor, you can get your pallets for, $25 versus.
That's a little bit further out in our vision. Yeah. So once we can consolidate our vendor base, we'd be able to leverage softwares like an Ariba or Jagger, which, those are all, like, they have sections of that are basically online marketplaces where you can compare pricing between different preferred vendors, right? We're still at the part where our vendor base is so decentralized. Right. We need to do this huge consolidation effort so that these things will be possible.
Right.
Like in a future state, they have this feature called Punch Out within the PO system where it just takes you to the vendor's website. You go and you build your shopping cart much like you would on an Amazon.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
And then it just transposes it right into the PO system. Right. Makes the ordering easy.
So, I know we haven't really talked about our competitors, but have you talked to any of them? Like, where are they in their procurement journey versus us? Have you got any feedback in terms of, hey, we're on, on this planning horizon, we're at like a 4 or a 7, things like that.
So one of the things I don't know is what our competitors are doing.
Oh, interesting.
Now, I have had conversations with some of our sister companies, and mostly in the software realm, like trying to find out ways, well, how do we leverage not just the softwares we buy at US Cold, but the ones we buy throughout the entire Swire group? And what I realized was that in certain areas, we're ahead of them.
Oh, really?
And like the way that we've been able to, Fred Caracciolo, shout out to him on my team, the way he manages contracts, very organized. Yes. And, the people in the Swire group were very impressed by the way that he managed his contracts. Mm-hmm. Now, on the way that we do vendor scoring, holding them to KPIs, we're a bit behind the ball on that, some of the Swire group companies. So I think information sharing, figuring out, well, if you're behind in this area, let's collaborate, and vice versa, where we can kind of use information already, but processes already proven by others, and kind of adopting them and using that as a bit of a piggyback situation.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great thought. And, I was just curious because, like your whole point about the iceberg, there are so many levels that people don't see when they think about procurement. So maybe talk to me a little bit about what people don't see, what they don't know.
Well, so what I see is the problems, well, not so much the challenges with the decentralized purchasing model, is that you have somebody at the facility, say a general manager.
Right.
They're involved in everything from soup to nuts in the facility.
Because they own the P&L, rightfully so.
So when it comes to turning trucks and making sure the customers are taken care of, my guess is that's probably amongst their top priorities.
Right.
How far down the list is successful and procurement, the time it takes to do it the right way?
Yeah.
How far down the list is that on their checklist as far as, I bet they could all do a great job at it, but I don't think it's their primary focus.
It's not their priority. Exactly.
So from my perspective, I find that when we're involved in stuff, we certainly negotiate better because we're willing to take it further. So I always talk to, the guys on my team. I feel like there's 3 ways you negotiate something. There's the people that just want what they want, and they're going to take whatever price you give them. All right, well, I want this pencil, and you have a pencil. I'll buy that pencil.
Right.
Then you have people that'll go, hey, can I have that pencil cheaper? And then you go, no, you can't have it cheaper. And they're like, well, I gave it the old college try.
Right.
My motto is we say no twice.
Oh,
and it's really effective. So
don't watch us if you're a supplier.
Yeah. But meaning, like, you really sometimes have to say, well, this isn't really reasonable, and we need to do something here. If we feel like we have leverage, we feel comfortable with pushing back.
Right.
So I feel like a lot of times we're able to help business owners not have to be the bad guy in these situations if we're involved.
But also, you have time and you have priority to be able to understand what the true value is of what you're purchasing, as opposed to somebody who's like, okay, I need this now. I need stretch wrap. It doesn't matter. I've got to get it, right? You understand the value, you understand the data. And so you're able to say, I push back and I say no twice because I see the value in this and I see what you're bringing.
And it's not all about the money. Like I had mentioned, like there's certain embedded relationships with some of our most critical vendors where, it's really a relationship
Right.
game. And sometimes it is something simply,
Right.
I'm buying a widget and I want to get it as cheap as possible.
Right.
A good example of trying to, take the time
Yeah.
to do procurement right is, the safety initiative this year.
Yes.
The LED lighted walkways that are
Mhm.
going to make the facilities more safe for pedestrian
Yep.
travel. I think it's more for forklift travel and multi-direction.
Yes.
Long story short, we were able to stop the process, find a preferred vendor by working with all the regional engineers,
Okay.
and they took an additional 15% off the price.
Mhm.
So the money that they were given to do this, now they can stretch that 15% further
That's
in
great.
1 year.
Yeah.
So, by taking the time, now it did extend the process by 6 weeks, but now we can do more.
Right. And now you're able to manage it and, kind of walk alongside the engineers and be able to offer those services that they don't have time to do.
Exactly.
Right. They don't have time to do that. So if they have to extend the project, guess what? You have a project manager.
Well, I think they have time to go out and buy them and try to figure out how
Right.
they're going to install them and how they do it in the way that's going to be safest.
Yep.
But this part about making sure that we're not taking risks in our contract, making sure we're getting the best value out of what we're buying, that's where procurement really does a good job.
Yeah. And so talk to me. I know you mentioned, shouted out to Fred Carciello, but talk to me a little bit about our IT procurement strategy, because I've been involved in projects and, we now have established some guidelines in part to protect us from a cyber attack and things like that. Right.
So one of the most important things I think that's coming in the future is collaborating with our cyber team,
Yes.
which, most recently has been reorganized under accounting and finance,
Yeah.
which in my mind removes a lot of the conflict of interest of having that group managed by the IT group.
Right.
Because when it comes to resourcing, who's going to get the money when it comes to that development or cyber? Now, it being in accounting,
Right.
it kind of removes that. So
Okay.
we can focus on what's important in an area. And from a vendor standpoint, vetting vendors that are going to be touching our network properly before we buy is extremely important to making sure that we don't put ourselves through any undue risk.
Right. And I think, it definitely shines a light on, hey, before you go out and buy something and install it on your computer, there's got to be some guideline or some guardrails to prevent someone from doing that.
Well, I think that procurement and cyber works hand in hand,
Yep.
and we have a bit of a symbiotic relationship. We want some of the same things. Like, we want things to be organized so that we can manage budgets and make sure we're getting value out of our contracts. But we have this process in place that ensures that a certain timeline is being followed. So when we have things like, well, cyber wants this to happen during the onboarding process, well, we have these gates where we can insert these processes that will allow us to be successful and make sure that the cyber group is able to assess new vendors before they come on board.
Right, because I've been involved in several projects, and it was before we established the PMO, which is another episode that we'll talk about later. But before we established the PMO, people were purchasing software, and again, IT's exploded, purchasing software, installing it, actually running software that we really weren't vetting. And so I think, by bringing Fred into the mix and incorporating IT procurement, we're really establishing a criteria by which we're preventing ourselves from harming ourselves through a cybersecurity.
I'd say at the time being, I think 95% of what we're buying in the software realm, we have complete kind of eyes on, and the processes are being run. It's really that stuff that is being done out in the field that we still need to kind of get eyes on and figure out what's out there that we're unaware of, and figure out how do we make those processes as tight as they can be, because even one vulnerability can lead to a huge attack.
I know. Yeah. And we're really trying to progress and innovate. We've done a lot of things with new systems, new technology. So you said, IT has kind of exploded, and it really has, because all of our automation, all of our layer pick, it's all run through systems, right? So it's important that not only that we're vetting those vendors, but we're also making sure that they have the security in place so that we're not vulnerable when something goes wrong.
Yeah. I mean, when I think of the processes, I also think about, well, I have an opportunity here to communicate to folks.
Right.
I have this in front of me. Okay, well, this is an IT thing. Well, Matt needs to know about this because it's a cyber risk.
Right.
Hey, maybe I should talk to the infrastructure group and make sure they're aware that they're going to have to put this thing in at some point.
Yes. Yeah. So it kind of goes full circle in terms of projects and just being able, again, I think, from what I've heard today is, the focus is on, you guys are focusing on procurement. So we are shining a light on what you're doing. And as a result of that, we're getting better communication. We're in some cases getting better value for what we're paying for, because, again, I think we say from United States Cold Storage, you get what you pay for. right? We may not be the least expensive, but we're going to be consistent and we're going to provide a consistent level of service. And I think that's what you guys are really working towards. And then I think just to wrap up, is there anything else like you're thinking about for 2024 or how you're going to progress, your department or this journey forward?
Well, I hope that I've built some trust out in the warehouses because it's an untapped market of opportunity. And, I just ask people be open-minded and be a part of collaborating to try to find new opportunities to help them make better results.
Now, is there anything else as, folks are watching at home and, you might have a more advanced procurement system, you might have a less one. Is there anything you could tell people maybe that you wish you'd done differently or kind of lessons learned as you've been part of this process?
I think lessons learned. I learned that I'm much better suited for this kind of job than accounting because I have a bit of a personality, which accounting is more of a dry thing. But I'm always happy that I have that accounting base because I can always think of things.
Absolutely.
And I know where things are budgeted. If I could go back and do it all over again, I probably would have made sure that I had somebody to run the PO system prior to rolling it out.
Yep. That would be helpful. So resources and resource constraints are always a challenge.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Brian, thank you so much for talking to me
Thanks,
today.
I've
learned a ton. I've learned a lot about procurement, the process. I've learned about the journey on how you think about setting up procurement from a sustainability perspective, from an ethical perspective. And, we talked about it a little bit at the end, but importantly, from a cybersecurity and technology perspective. So thank you so much for joining me. Hopefully someone from US Cold is tuning into this so you can see that we really have thought about procurement and we've thought about what's going to benefit you guys. We also think about it, how it's going to benefit our suppliers. So I appreciate that. Well, stay tuned for the next ColdCast and stay cold.